The waves of my life, at times, are gentle and steady, rolling softly against the shore. Other times, they're unpredictable, unruly and uncertain, consuming everything that dare enter its territory. I, a mere mortal, am powerless. Powerless against the relentless storms of the sea. When I'm caught in the tempest, there's only one who can still it. Only one with authority over the atmosphere and sea.
Hey everybody, good morning. My name's Dave. If we haven't met, I'm amphibious. Land and water. So good to be with all of you here, especially if this is your first time. We super welcome you. We're glad you're here. I want to start off by talking about, we are in a weird moment in history, and it feels big, but I can't even put my finger on why it's so big, but it feels big. Here's how I know. A couple of weeks ago, probably almost 2 months ago, my son comes up to me and says, "Dad, I wrote a paper for English. I need you to proof it for me. Can you proof it for me?" I'm a former English teacher. I'm like, "Sure, son. This is great." He's a senior in high school. So, his writing is okay. And he's also the son of 2 English majors, which is, not going to help him, but whatever. So he had to write a comparative paper between 2 novels that he read in English class, Frankenstein and Clara and the Sun, and compare these kind of 2 dystopian novels, like what are major themes, what's going on, that kind of stuff. And so I'm reading the paper, and it's pretty good. I was like, this is not bad. You've got some great ideas here. Your themes are, I think these are spot on. I think these are true. Your support is terrible. You don't have nearly enough, not nearly enough quotes, but you boost that up and, make your case from the book, from the actual text of the book. This is a real good paper. Yeah, how long did it take you to write all this? And he gets a smile on his face. And he goes, 2.2 seconds. And I'm like, ha ha. And he's like, no, seriously. Dad, have you ever heard of ChatGPT-3? And this was my introduction to ChatGPT-3. Now, if you don't know, ChatGPT-3 is a pretty exceptional program. I think it was based out of OpenAI, which is here in the Bay Area. It is a artificial intelligence system. I'm not a tech guy, so forgive me. That basically tries to mimic human writing. And it takes the entire database of human writing on the internet, which is voluminous, and actually tries to mimic human writing and syntax, and it actually is getting better and better. It's actually pretty good. Like, as a former English teacher, I said to my son, this is a pretty good paper. And I said, wait, you just plugged this in? He's like, yeah, I just plugged in what I thought were some of the major ideas, asked this program, ChatGPT, to write 700 words on this topic, and it was done 2.2 seconds later. And I'm like, that's insane. He's like, I know. And I said, no, that's insane. And he goes, I know. And I said, son, this has really far-reaching implications. I said, but, it's not going to pass the plagiarism filters. Of course, you have as you know, everybody who takes a class now, and if you're a student and you're submitting an online paper, you have to put it through a plagiarism filter, because you have to make sure that what the student is submitting is the student's original work, right? That's the whole point of plagiarism filters. There's a sacred trust that exists between a teacher and a student, that when a student turns in a paper, that the paper is theirs, right? The student did the work, knows the ideas, and is putting it forth. So that's why plagiarism filters exist, right? He's like, Dad, because it's originally created uniquely every time, I could put 20 prompts in, and it would pump out 20 different papers. It never gets flagged by any plagiarism filter. Dad, it's a unique created work, just not by me, by a computer. And I'm like, huh? And he's like, I know. And I said, son, and he's like, I think this is going to change college. I think they're going to go back to the old writing it down blue books, right? Because how else? Because here's the question. I said, son, that's really problematic because there's a sense in which there is a sacred trust. When you turn in a paper as a student, you're saying, teacher, I know this information and this is my work, right? And so all of a sudden, it opens up a question. Who wrote it? Who wrote it? Who wrote this paper? Who is the person who wrote this? Is it the computer? Is it the person? It's going to open up all sorts of questions. This leads to an epistemological crisis. Epistemology is the study of truth. What is truth? Like, what is true? How do I know? And who do I trust? Like, for example, I was thinking about this, and I'm like, look, I have to do a sermon on Matthew 8, 4 to 12. I put it in ChatGPT. Out pops a sermon. It was better than anything I had. So I'm like, it was really good. It was really good. I'm like, well, that's robust. Because it scoured the internet for every sermon that's ever been preached on this passage and all of its themes, and it's good. And I was like, that's good. So I'm just going to deliver that message. You don't have to know that a computer wrote it. But this is the question, like epistemologically, what's true? How do I know? Who do I trust? And I got worried there for a minute. I got worried. I'm like, wait, is my job going to go away? Are robots going to be able to do this? And luckily, I have a buddy named Matt McPhail, and he said, I think you're safe, and he sent me this screenshot of asking ChatGPT for this. Please write a sermon outline relating Jesus to the vocal group Boys to Men. And it couldn't do it. It couldn't do it. So I'm safe. I beat the robots because I can do that. I don't know how fruitful that would be, but at least I can do something they can't. Now, but the big question is, guys, and this is a moment in history, right? This is a moment in history, and I think we got to pay attention. What's true? How do I know that's what it's true, and who do I trust? And you saw this become a giant issue. Now, there's a number of issues. This is a particular moment in human experience where the idea of trust and where information comes from and how do you know and who do you trust is becoming a giant issue. A couple of examples. Again, I'm not trying to wade into anything here. I just want to show you some real stats. Pew Research has been, for the past 70 years, analyzing a whole bunch of data, and there's a question they've been asking the American public since 1958, which goes a long time back. And the question, I want to show you this. Here's the question. I'm going to show you the results. Here's the question. I trust the federal government to do the right thing always or most of the time. This is the question. Now, they have data on this all the way back to 1958. Here's the high point. The high point was in October of 1964, where 77% of the American public, 77%, pretty high, it's a high C, and it was in October 1964. And I was talking about this with my kids, and my son's like, oh, it makes sense. It's right after the Civil Rights passage of the Civil Rights Act and before the Vietnam War. Low point, October 2017 at 18%. Now it's climbed 2 percentage points to 20% since. That's not really. Here's the overall graph. See if you can see any trends. It spikes in 2001, right around September. And then slowly goes down. Now, here's an interesting point. Can you really have a country in which 80% of the people do not trust its leaders to do the right thing always or most of the time? Do you see the problem here? The erosion of this, right? And my buddy Jay Kim, he's the lead pastor here, he came up with this, and I wanted to share, this is kind of his creation, but I thought it was, we were talking about it, he's like, I have these ideas. Here's kind of what he thought about, the concept of authority is being degraded in this cultural moment for a couple different reasons, but these three in particular. Number one, the ever-expanding influence of media. The media has changed dramatically. Like, do you guys remember, it used to be, when I grew up, that if you wanted news about the world, it was available for half an hour from 6:30 to 7 on 3 channels. And that's it. That was it. And maybe you had a newspaper. That's very different than it is now, right? The expanding. And the nature of those models were subscription. They wanted more people to come, and they always said things like this: tune in to America's most trusted news source. Do you remember those words? Now, the shifting of the media is get eyeballs, get clicks, And it's a very different data-driven model. And so the expansion of media, coupled with the Venn diagram of the ever-expanding influence of technology, we can get news and information in our pockets through our cell phones. And all sorts of people comment on this because, again, this is ubiquitous now. We all have cell phones and we all have ways to get influence. Technology is changing the way that we consume information. 300 years ago, if there was something that happened in Turkey, you and I wouldn't know about it. We just wouldn't. Because news traveled at the speed of foot, right? Now, every single thing that happens everywhere in the world, good or bad, is immediate, and that's overwhelming, right? And then also, there's this new thing, it's not really new, but it's certainly burgeoning, and that's the ever-deepening influence of individual autonomy. People say, I'm the king. And so a lot of times, people only consume news that fits their predisposed ideas about what they want the world to be like. And we find that it's called echo chambers or whatever, but there's a sense is we just don't want people telling us what to do. So this creates real authority problems. It's a distrust and a distrusting of authority. I think about this because I've got kids, right? I've got a senior in high school and a sophomore in high school, 18 and 16. So I get to see kind of their friends and this up close. It's a very different world than when I grew up. There's a guy named Mark Sayers. He's a really brilliant Christian thinker. I really appreciate a lot of what he writes. He's written a number of books, but he gave this analogy once at a conference, just on a podcast, and I remember thinking, that's really right. He said, this is the way childhood works. Childhood and maturity and adolescence and growing into adulthood is like being in the basement of that giant castle in Beauty and the Beast, with the east wing and the west wing, and it's in disrepair, and there's a south wing, and it's just a giant cavernous thing, right? And you can hear that there are your friends and your family, and they're singing, and they're somewhere in the but you don't know where. And your job is to try to figure out how to get to them, how to get to God, how to get to your friends, how to get to your family, the things, meaning, purpose, all the things that's in a room, but you don't know how to get there. Now, when I was growing up, there was these giant signposts. And yes, these signposts were a little bit rickety, and sometimes people didn't trust them, but they were there, and they were big signposts, and they had things that they said on these signposts, like avoid all the stairs with the vines, because that's the road to the monsters, or only follow the flickering lights. They were like clues to help me navigate how to get out of that dark basement to where it was. These institutions, like the church, like I had principals in school. I had teachers who poured in. I had coaches. There was people in my community who poured in. I had a mom and a dad. But as these institutions began to erode and the trust in these institutions began to erode, now as I look at my teenagers, it's not so much like they're trapped in the basement and it's dark and there's a couple of these old signs and they're you have to kind of brush off the cobwebs. The analogy that Mark Sayers uses, which I've seen too, is like there's a billion signs everywhere and they all say different information, contradictory information. And there's so many signs and so much information that they don't know, it might as well be no signs because they give contradictory information. That's what it's like to be a teenager in this world. Who do I trust? What's true? How do I know? And who do I trust? And this actually begins to erode. The more and more these things accelerate, the temptation here, and this is what I don't want to give into, is to give into cynicism and skepticism about life or truth. Some of this I get is justifiable. There are some valid reasons for us not to trust some of these institutions. But the danger is that we are quickly becoming a people totally accustomed to and even repulsed by the very concept of authority. Here's why that's problematic. For followers of Jesus and those who want to be followers of Jesus, this poses a tremendous challenge. Because you cannot read the Gospels without being struck by the definitive and unapologetic authority Jesus communicates and claims. So what do we do with that? We can debate the merits of our compliance to various earthly authorities. That's outside the scope of this paper. But following Jesus, it's clear from the Gospels, Jesus demands that we surrender to his authority. And in a world that is distrustful of all authority, that's a real problem for a follower of Jesus. So let's talk about Jesus and authority, because this is critical for us to understand. We're going to talk about this idea of authority in the story in Matthew chapter 8, verses 5. Thank you. That could have gone in the water. That would have been very bad. Thank you. Like a true musician. Protect the instruments. We're going to talk about this in Matthew 8. I'm going to read the story, and we're going to pull from it some interesting things, because this is a moment that talks about authority. So it's Matthew 8. You can follow along in your Bible, or it's up here on the screens. This is right after the Sermon on the Mount, and this is the text. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home, paralyzed, suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" The centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and that one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west, and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment. So a couple thoughts here. First, we're going to give a little bit of background just to locate us in the story and in geography. This is actually a map of the area. That's Capernaum in the kind of upper left-hand corner of the Sea of Galilee. And that's where they're located. Right above that, there's this hill. And actually, scholars and folks have gone up, and there's right above, like literally right above this area. I've never been to this area. I've never been to the Holy Land or anything like that. But from the people I know who've gone, and they have drone tours, which are really interesting. You can see it. There's like a natural amphitheater right there. They think that's where Jesus just delivered the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, he just spoke to like all these thousands of people. And there's like a natural amphitheater, and it's right above that town. Jesus might have literally walked down. Here's some facts about Capernaum. It's a small fishing village on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. Archaeologists say it had between 1,200 and 1,700 residents, so it's pretty small. And it was pretty insignificant. In the ancient world, the way they designate between significant cities and not significant places is a city has a wall and a village does not. Does that make sense? So if it's big enough, it has enough people, there will be a wall around it. There's no archaeological evidence for a wall. So it's pretty insignificant. There's no paved streets in it, so it wouldn't have had that. The most public place in Capernaum was the synagogue. That was the religious and social center of the town. And what's interesting is from Capernaum are 4 disciples who would play a pretty big role in the rest of the story. Simon, also later named Peter, Andrew, his brother, and James and John. So there's these 4 of these guys are from Capernaum. So that's the city. Not significant, not big, not a large metro area. But then let's talk about centurions. Centurions were military officials who commanded regiments of about 100 soldiers. When we say 100 years, we say century, centurion, 100 century. That's where this comes from. All Roman military took pagan religious oaths in allegiance to the divine Caesar. If you remember, we've talked about this a lot. The Caesars believed, they taught and they told everyone, listen, I'm God. The Caesar was God. And the reason they did this, because if you're going to conquer a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of religious backgrounds with a whole bunch of gods, that's cool as long as you recognize there's one God above all, and that's Caesar. And he put out coins. Caesar Augustus put out coins. There's no name under heaven and earth by which men will be saved other than Caesar. Some of you Bible scholars know that might ring familiar. Later on, Peter would utter that exact same phrase, except he would change the last name. There's no name under heaven and earth by which men will be saved other than Jesus. He would switch it. That's a treasonous thing to say. Peter had some cojones there. All Roman military took this a religious oath because, again, your oath as a military officer was to Caesar. You served about 20 years before retirement, and that doesn't seem like a long time, but in the ancient world, that you didn't live till 80. Do you know what I mean? The ancient world was harsh and hard. So you served 20 years before retirement, and you were often constantly relocated to wherever Caesar wanted you. So the transience of this job and the job assignment made having a family either impossible or discouraged. We're not sure if it was outlawed or just discouraged, but regardless, it would have been very difficult because you're traveling with a different itinerant job description. And so centurions had servants, and these servants would travel with them wherever they went. And since they had no wife, they had no kids, and that was discouraged in the ancient world because Rome and Caesar wanted his soldiers wholly devoted to him. And if you got a wife and kids, you might think twice about dying. Does that make sense? So you want to have no attachments whatsoever, only an attachment to Caesar and to the army. And so this servant, whoever the servant, they were expensive, and he likely would have traveled with the centurion everywhere he went, which explains a little bit why a centurion would go out of his way to talk to Jesus to save his servant. Like, get another one. What's the big deal, right? But you see in the story that this centurion is deeply, deeply concerned about his servant. It makes no sense until you understand this might have been the closest thing this centurion had to family. This might have been the closest thing he had to a brother. And centurions were despised by Jewish people. They represented Rome. And Rome represented the evil military empire. Anybody who dared come across Rome or said something like a Jewish person might say, that there is a creator God higher than Caesar, you know what Rome did to those people? It's real easy. They just put you on a crucifix in the middle of town and let everyone see. Here's what Rome does to people who say that. Go ahead and say it again. And we'll put your kids up there too, right next to you and your wife. We'll do it just so everyone knows. Just so everyone knows. That's what Rome did. There was early in the story of Jesus, if you recall, every Christmas we read about how there was a time for a census. Do you remember that? There's a census. Why is there a census? Why does Rome need a census? For taxes. What does Rome want taxes for? The Roman military army, right? The occupation, the military-industrial complex. This is what conquered people. The Jews hated the Romans. They were apostate. They were godless. They were evil. They were terrible. And so this is where they were. And yet, who's the one who just proclaimed in this place Jesus' authority? A couple lessons. And there's some pretty shocking things. 3 lessons that I think come from here. Number 1, there's this moment in Matthew 8:8 where he makes the plea, and Jesus says, and he asks him, hey, should I come to your house? Like this, how's this going to work? I'm not allowed in your house, right? Jewish people, Gentiles, they weren't allowed to go. Do you want me to come to your house? I will, but that'd be a problem maybe. And the centurion says this, Lord, I don't deserve to have you come under my roof. And what Matthew does here is he repeats verbatim the exact same words that another person uttered earlier in Matthew that we studied in Matthew 3 100 weeks ago. That was a joke because we're just going through Matthew verse. Okay, sorry. It was funny in my head. John the Baptist, when talking about Jesus, said, I baptize you with water for repentance, but after me will come a one who is more powerful than I, whose sandals I am not worthy to carry. It's the exact same Greek phrasing. And the centurion repeats it. Do you see what Matthew is trying to say here? He's trying to hint back. John the Baptist knew who Jesus was. He bowed to his authority, understood who Jesus was, and he utters the same phrase as this centurion, which is the same idea, I don't deserve. The Roman centurion, a man with authority, power, and prestige, acknowledges the reality of his lowly position in relation to Jesus. Surrender to the authority of Jesus always begins with an acknowledgement of our smallness in comparison to Jesus' greatness. That's the way it always works. You're saying, and this is what the centurion is saying, and this is what it means to be under Jesus' authority. You say, Jesus, you are greater than I am. And this is the position of a human being. This is the proper position of humans. All through the scriptures, humility is a virtue. It's not just a virtue, it's a way, the only way for humans to properly relate to God. Why? Because God's an egomaniac? No, because it's true. Pretending that your God is actually not reality. It's not true. Pretending you know everything is a lie. It's just a lie. It's not proper reality. So we see this posture of humility all through the scriptures. Psalm 8, the author says, when I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them? What are mortals that you care for them? This is the posture of humility, do you see? This is the psalmist saying, you are God, which means I am not. This is the central posture. James puts it even more forcefully in the New Testament. James, in the New Testament, writes, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. God opposes the proud. Is it because he's an egomaniac? No, because this is a horrible position for a human to be in. Have you ever met somebody who nobody could tell anything that they're ever wrong, that they accepted no authority from anyone? Have you ever met anyone like that? They are awful, aren't they? And more than that, history has shown us those people are dangerous. They're dangerous, right? No one can tell me anything. This is horrific. John Newton, who wrote the famous hymn, Amazing Grace, he put it this way: I am persuaded that love and humility are the highest attainments in the school of Christ, and the brightest evidences that he is indeed our master. This is a man who was a former slave trader. It takes a lot of humility for a slave trader to say, I was wrong. And not just wrong, but what I deserved because of my wrong action was alienation from God. But God in his goodness invited me to repent and change. And I took that, and God has changed me and cleansed me and has forgiven me. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. I was blind, but now I see. That is written from a posture of humility. Do you see? I could keep going on. 1 Peter 5, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so at the proper time God may exalt you. Matthew 23, where Jesus himself says, the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. In Philippians 2, the author, Paul, puts forth this incredible poem. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant. Why should we do this? And he goes forth with this incredible, beautiful poem that Christ did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, and emptied himself even of all things, that he took the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient even to the point of death, even on a cross. It's all in this. This is the position that humans should take. This is what it means to be under authority. And this is just the way it works. We all need someone greater. Even the realm of psychology tells us that we as humans, although we don't like authority, are desperate for it. We desperately need someone greater. And this happens even when we're children. In the 60s and 70s, people began studying. And again, I'm not a psychologist. I don't have a degree. I didn't study this. But I have friends who are studying this and study psychology. And they say that this is actually really important. The idea of attachment and attachment theory is an important burgeoning of a study in human psychology. And the idea is that we all need to have secure attachments to our parents. And to an adult, to somebody in our family. And if we don't, if our parents actually abandon us, or abuse us, or are up and down, good one day and then bad the next. This is like families with addiction. It can do tremendous damage to a person. We need secure attachments. We need security and authority. Kurt Thompson, in his book, The Soul of Shame, puts it this way. He said, one of the fundamental aspects of secure attachment is the infant's enlarging sense of the presence of a secure relational base from which he or she can explore the world. Without the presence of safety, little to no creative activity can ensue. Thus, when babies feel emotionally safe, they are free to engage their surrounding environment, learning not only about their world, but their responses to it. They grow in their joy and curiosity and discovery. Even when they encounter dangerous or noxious stimuli or sustain a rupture in a relationship, example, crossing a limit appropriately set by a parent, subsequently having to endure the negative consequence of that choice, a secure attachment provides for the healing and repair of that distress or that rupture. In this way, even in the face of temporarily unpleasant effects, the baby's sense of curiosity and grounding in joy are preserved. The whole point is, even as babies, we thrive when we have good, loving authority in our lives. This is to experience the safety and joy of secure attachment. We need someone greater than us, someone stronger, someone wiser, more capable, more powerful, who we can trust, who loves us. And in joy, we surrender to their greatness and to their love, and we experience freedom. This is true for infants, and it's true for us as adults. We need this. The authority of Jesus. The authority of Jesus continues on. The centurion says in Matthew 8, he asks him, shall I come to your home? And he says, no. And then he says this, the centurion says, just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. And I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. This centurion notices something about Jesus and his authority. Later on in the story, both Matthew and Mark will paint a picture of Jesus as a man with incredible authority. First, we've just heard the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus teaches authoritatively. Remember, they say they're amazed. But there's this other moment. Jesus is going to get on a lake, and there's going to be a storm. And Jesus is going to shut down the storm with a word. And then later on, he's going to go right across that lake and meet a guy who's demon-possessed. And Jesus is going to call all those demons out of that guy and put him back in his right mind. And the author is putting these stories right next to each other. Jesus has complete authority over the physical world and the supernatural realm and the physical realm. There's not, and this for the disciples is like, what can't this guy do? He has authority over the physical realm and the supernatural realm. Like, who is like this? Who are you? Who are you? This is what the centurion is saying. He's saying, no, I know you can heal him. This is radical. This is radical. I mean, for a centurion who's taken a pledge to King Caesar, to Lord Caesar, to say, no, actually, I know what authority is, and you actually have authority. Do you see how radical this is? This is incredible. This is why Jesus was amazed. The centurion recognizes that there's something fundamentally different about Jesus. Different in the same category, but different than any authority on earth. I want to talk a little bit about the idea that Jesus has authority. That Jesus is actually not just a good teacher, but actually something more. In fact, Lifeway Research just completed in 2022, at the end of 2022, a series of research on the state of theology. And they asked Christians a number of questions, and this one in particular stood out to me. They asked them, how strongly do you agree or disagree with this sentence? And there's like 5. Sort of agree, strongly disagree, sort of disagree, I have no idea, sort of agree, and strongly agree. And here's the sentence, here's the statement. Jesus was a great teacher, but he was not God. And here's the results. Jesus was a great teacher, but he was not God. 53% of Christians polled strongly agreed or somewhat agreed with that sentence. 53%. 11% said they're not sure. Now, to be fair, this question is kind of weird. My daughter was like, well, he was a great teacher, but he was also God. Does that make it sort of true? So it's a little confusing. I get it. But the idea, and then 36% said, no, I strongly disagree. That Jesus actually was God. Do you see the tumult here? Got to be clear on this, though. Yes, it's true, and my daughter would say, Jesus was a great teacher. And we say that. But Jesus was God. He was a great teacher because he was God himself on the earth. He's the Messiah. Jesus was not just a great teacher, he was God himself. And I think the reason for this sometimes can be, I think many of us, especially maybe in the Silicon Valley, we prefer Jesus the great teacher because if he's God, then what he says is authoritative over us, and we don't like that. Nobody likes to be told what to do. If Jesus was just a great teacher, that means his teachings are simply optional. We can pick and choose the ones that we agree with that align with what we want. But if Jesus is actually God, that means we must search his teachings, we must study them, be a people of his teachings, and his teachings are not optional, they are imperative and binding on me and you, anyone who bows their knee to Jesus. If I disobey or am living in a way that is contrasted to the teachings of Jesus, I am under the authority. It's like the roof in this building. We are under the authority of Jesus, and everyone who bows to that, who enters into that, is under, his teachings are not optional, they are imperative. And I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Because who wants to be told what to do, right? We're Americans. Today's the anniversary of the Boston Massacre, right? You know what we did? We told King George, the most powerful ruler of the most powerful empire, here's what you can do with your ruling, right? We're Americans. That's what we do. We fought a revolution. It's called a revolution. We were rebels, right? It's like baked into us. Don't tell us what to do. Thank you very much. And it's only gotten stronger over time. But if Jesus is God, his teachings are not just nice ideas that you can incorporate into your life if you'd like. They're binding. Sometimes people say, well, the Bible never claims that Jesus was God. Okay, so we just got to deal with that head on. Let me read 2 verses, and I could give you 50. Colossians 1, this is how Paul talks about Jesus. I think this is one of the most soaring passages in all of Scripture. This is worth thinking about. He's talking about the Son, Jesus. The Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things are held together. Who is this sentence about in all of human history? There's no one who has ever lived that this can apply to. This is exceptional. Jesus is God. And then Jesus puts it this way. Here's how Jesus describes it. In Matthew 28, this is right before a very important passage called the Great Commission. Jesus says to his followers, Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. How much authority? Some authority? Part authority? C.S. Lewis puts it this way in his book, Mere Christianity. And you've seen this and probably read this, but I think it's worth coming back to. He says, a man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. And then finally, Jesus is amazed. When Jesus heard the centurion's faith, this profession, he was amazed. This word's used only twice in the New Testament about Jesus. About a lot of time, humans are amazed at Jesus. That's used a lot. But Jesus is amazed twice. Once when there's a town that does not believe, and he's amazed at their unbelief. And once here with the centurion, he's amazed. He said to those following, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. The word faith is a little weird. We've done so much work on this, and we'll continue to do work. The word faith is weird. The word faith is weird because in English, it's a noun. There's no verb form of faith. I faith that. But there is in the other languages, so it's a little weird. The word faith in the Greek is the word pistis. There's a lot of work going on here. I just want to talk a little bit about this word. It means trust or a strong confidence in. But it's not just I believe, like, hey, man, I believe the Raiders are going to win the Super Bowl. It's not hoping against all hope. It's not stupid hope. No offense. If you're a Raider fan, write me later. Do you see what I mean? It's this strong confidence, but it goes even further. It's not just strong confidence, it's loyalty. And it's not just loyalty like I say, it's enacted loyalty, it's lived out. And it's allegiance. It's often used oftentimes, about a third of the time in the ancient world, it was used in terms of allegiance to a king. You have my pistis, you have my allegiance. All these meanings kind of go into when Jesus says to this, it's this exceptional. This centurion gets it in a way that Israel hasn't yet. And all I can think of is this phrase, a person like this in a place like this, a person like this, a centurion in a place like this, Capernaum. A person like this, a centurion, who should have no understanding of this, totally gets that Jesus has authority over all the world, that he's actually God. And by the way, this wouldn't be the first time a centurion gets it. There's a couple other times when a centurion's like, wow, this is truly the Son of God. There's something about Jesus that some of these centurions get, some. In a place like this, Capernaum, we live in a world that doesn't understand authority, that distrusts authority, and I get it. There's a lot of good reasons, right? I get it. But we were made for authority. Not abusive authority, but proper authority, and Jesus is it. Jesus is the authority, and when he walked on the earth, he said, hey, I have all authority, follow me. Is it because he's an egomaniac? No, it's because no one else can get us out of the mess that we're in. No one else can beat the powers of sin and death. No one else is God who knows the way. There's no one else. There's no other way. And Jesus says, not only will I get you out of this mess, I'll give my life to make sure you are free, to make sure that you are safe. This is what this baptism is, right? This is what we celebrate. This is what the baptismal tank and what the act of baptism is. It's saying, Jesus, you're my authority. It's you and me. I'll follow you. This is the invitation of Jesus. And in a world like this world does not get authority. It's distrustful of authority. And one of the things we can do for this world is to show it, look, we get it. We get that authority is complex and confusing, but we are a people like the centurion who are under an authority, and that authority is Jesus, the King, the Lord. He is good. His ways are good, and we are a people under authority to show the world that we can be a people like this in a place like this, in a place like Silicon Valley where the only authority seems to be money or self. We can say, those are terrible gods. Let us show you a true God, a God who came and lived and died and sacrificed himself to free us from the powers of sin and death and to usher us into life and life everlasting. His ways are good. His love is true. If there is any authority in this world that is worth listening to, it is Jesus the Christ, the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth. Come and see. We are a people under his authority. We are marked by him. Come and see. In a world that has no understanding of authority, that might be one of the best gifts that we can give them. To be a person, a people like the centurion who say, he is our king. We understand authority, and we give it to Jesus. I got to make an invitation. This morning at the first service, these two women came and they proclaimed it, and then you saw Ryan, our sixth grader. He made his proclamation. And that's going to be with him. I was talking to him backstage. I'm like, dude, do you realize Jesus is going to be with you every day of your life for the rest of your life, every day. Through all the ups and downs, man, he's with you and I know. And he's been with me every day since and before. If you've never been baptized and you want, like Ryan and like the women in our first service, to say, Jesus, you and me, I'm telling you, we'll wait for you. We got towels backstage. We got clothes. We'll wait for you. We'll baptize you right after the service if you want. We're a people who are under Jesus' authority. If that's you and you want that, I'll be right here. But let's be people under Jesus' authority. A little bit more today than yesterday. And a little bit more the day after that. A little bit more of our lives submitted to him. All of it. To be a people under his authority. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for being the kind of authority that you are. Not just that you have authority, what you do. It is through all things. You hold all things together. Everything was created for you and in you. But more than that, Jesus, you have authority, and you have shown what kind of God you are, the kind that comes and leaves heaven and empties himself and dies on a cross for our benefit. Help us be people like the centurion whose faith amazes you because we love you and are loyal to you, and we understand that you have authority. Help us be like that. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Will you stand with me as we sing to this?